Johnny Sports Network here to provide you with my Week 16 NFL predictions. And we only have 3 weeks left in the regular season, which means we are in the home stretch in the playoff race. Last week, I went 12-4 on my picks. Overall in the season, 151-72. What does Week 16 have in store for us? Without further ado, let's get into the Week 16 NFL predictions right here on the Johnny Sports Network. As always, we begin with Thursday Night Football, and this week we have a major AFC West matchup, Broncos and Chargers. And right now, the Broncos sit in 6th in the AFC playoffs, and the Chargers in 7th in the AFC playoffs. And despite that, these are two teams that are trending in opposite directions. The Broncos on a 4-game winning streak, the Chargers on a 2-game losing streak, and they've lost 3 of their last 4 games. The Chargers, they had the lead against the Buccaneers at the half in last week's game, but a dominant second half by the Buccaneers propelled them to a 40-17 victory over the Chargers. And I am intrigued to see how the Chargers respond in this game. I think the first 10 or so minutes of the game is going to be an indicator of how we're going to see the Chargers respond. Because the Chargers, they were shut out in the second half last week against the Buccaneers. And even though the Chargers are favored right now by about 3 points, I'm going to call for the upset. I just feel like the Broncos, they have been playing much better than the Chargers have in the last few weeks. Despite Bo Nix throwing 3 interceptions last week, they still got the win. And I think the Broncos, they make it 5 in a row. Texans and Chiefs, the first of 2 Saturday games this week. For the Chiefs, it's unknown if Patrick Mahomes will play in this game. He did sustain a high ankle sprain in last week's game against the Browns. The x-rays were negative, and he is considered week to week. But there is still a possibility he could play this week. Right now, the Texans are favored by 2.5 points last time I looked. But if Patrick Mahomes does play in this game, I think it does shift to the Chiefs being favored by a point, maybe a point and a half. But if I had to guess, considering the fact that they still are in a fairly good position to obtain the number 1 seed in the AFC, the fact that they are in the middle of a 3-game, 11-day stretch, I think they may sit him out in this game, and they will turn to Carson Wentz for this game. But based off of how the Chiefs' defense has played throughout this entire season, the Chiefs, they've won games because of their defense. Last week, their defense forced 6 turnovers. And I do think this game is going to be very low scoring, as I think both defenses will be able to hold their own in this game. I just think that Carson Wentz just has to manage the game, and I think he'll be able to do that if he is indeed called upon to start this game. I think the Chiefs, they pull off a potential upset depending on if Patrick Mahomes does play in this game or not. But if I had to guess, I think they may sit him out given that they are in the middle of a 3 games and 11-day stretch. Up next, we have the Steelers and the Ravens. The Steelers, they have had the Ravens number as of late. Lamar Jackson is 2-5 against the Steelers in his career. The Steelers, they are dealing with some uncertainties right now. George Pickens, he has missed the last couple of games. TJ Watt is also injured right now. But there is some optimism that TJ Watt will be able to play in this game on Saturday. And the way I see this game, I think if TJ Watt does not play in this game, I think this is going to be that time that we do see the Ravens win against the Steelers convincingly, as more often than not, Mike Tomlin, he does have the keys to make Lamar frustrated and have Lamar off of his game. But I think part of that is the presence of TJ Watt. And if TJ Watt is in the game, then I do think that it does trend in the Steelers' favor because it will make it a low scoring game. And right now, the Ravens, they are favored by about 6.5 to 7 points, depending on where you're looking. I think with TJ Watt, the Steelers, they'll be able to cover. But I think if he's not there, then I think the Ravens, they run away with it. But despite the recent struggles for Lamar Jackson against the Steelers, I do think the Ravens, they get it done here. But if you do find the value in the points with the Steelers, I would definitely consider taking it. But we'll see the status of TJ Watt and George Pickens for this matchup. Giants and Falcons. The Giants, another disappointing season, 2-12 on the year, despite giving some valiant efforts in several games. While the Falcons, they not only got a much needed win over the Raiders on Monday night last week, but a season-saving win. It may have been 15-9, but when you consider the fact the Falcons were on a 4-game losing streak, you will take any win, no matter how you get it. It does not matter, just win and move on. And looking at the Falcons' schedule the rest of the way, it is very possible that they could win out and finish the season 10-7, and it may be enough to sneak into the playoffs, depending on what happens around them in these final 3 weeks of the year. But this just feels pretty self-explanatory. Even though the Falcons, they did have the struggle win against the Raiders, the fact they got the win, I do think that is momentum and confidence. While the Giants, they are just looking forward to the season being over with. Tommy DeVito sustained a concussion in last week's game, and Tim Boyle was playing quarterback. And I'm going to go with the Falcons in this game to win convincingly. But we will see if, just like last week against the Raiders, if the Falcons make it more difficult than what they really need it to be. Patriots and Bills. The Patriots, another disappointing season. However, Drake May has shown that he does have potential in this league. And like the Giants, the Patriots, they have given some valiant efforts this season in games. And they easily could have more wins in the win column than what they really do. They go on the road to take on a very confident Bills team, a Bills team that got a very convincing win on the road against the Lions last week. And don't be fooled by the box score. The Bills, they dominated that game. Josh Allen has been playing on a whole nother level in these last few games. In fact, throughout most of the season. And worst case scenario, the Bills start this game off slow and they struggle early, but as the game goes on, they're going to assert their dominance. I do not think the Patriots, they have much of a chance in this game. I just feel like the Bills, with their momentum, with a win against a serious contender in the Lions, I think it translates into this game, and the Bills win by a bunch. Cardinals and Panthers. The Panthers, they have played some serious contenders close this season, but last week a 30-14 loss against the Cowboys at home. And Bryce Young, ever since he returned as the starting quarterback, he has shown that he has a lot of potential in this league. I do think this could be a trap game for the Cardinals. I have talked about all season, the Cardinals, they're just very unpredictable. And I would not be surprised if we did see an upset go down this week. But I am personally not going to call for it. I do want to see how the Panthers respond after the performance last week. If Bryce Young can play clean football, as part of the issue was Bryce Young had 2 interceptions in that game. The Panthers defense, they gave up 410 yards against the Cowboys last week. While the Cardinals, I do think that they are in for a good game by James Conner. I think the Cardinals, they do win, but I would not be surprised the Panthers pull off the upset, because that has been a trap game on my mind for weeks. But I will pick the Cardinals. Lions and Bears. The Lions lost David Montgomery potentially for the season and Alim McNeil for the season against the Bills last week. And they go on the road to take on a Bears team that's on an 8-game losing streak. And I'm not going to call for the upset at all. I am going to pick the Lions. However, I do think this could be a potential trap game for the Lions. And the reason why I say that, even though the Bears are on an 8-game losing streak, we did see the Bears keep it close with the Lions at the end of the Thanksgiving Day game. And this is only the Lions' second outdoor game all season long. As the Lions, they have pretty much gotten used to playing in a dome, and they're not used to playing outside. So that could be a potential factor for the Lions in this game. But I am not going to call for any upset at all. I am picking the Lions, but I would not be surprised if we saw the Bears once again keep it close against the Lions like they did on Thanksgiving Day. Titans and Colts. For the Titans, the status for running back Tony Pollard is uncertain. Will it be Tony Pollard or Tajay Spears leading the backfield for the Titans in this game on Sunday? One thing we do know, the Titans made an announcement they will once again be switching quarterbacks. Will Levis is going back to the bench, and Mason Rudolph will be the starting quarterback for this game on Sunday. And this does feel like a game where I have to pick someone to win. Even though the Colts did really well at stopping the run against the Broncos last week, I do think whoever starts at running back, whether it is Tony Pollard or Tajay Spears, I think they are in for a good game this week. And when I look at the quarterbacks this matchup, Mason Rudolph versus Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson, he has had some positive moments, but he has had some negative moments at the same time. He had 2 interceptions last week, and I feel like I can trust Mason Rudolph more than I can Anthony Richardson this week. As I have been saying since week 4 that Mason Rudolph, he gives the Titans the best chance to win games. As we know how strong the Titans defense has been this season, the Titans defense, they've given chance after chance after chance for the offense to win games, but they haven't been able to do it. But I think they will do it this week. I think the Titans, they go on the road and they pull off the upset. As Anthony Richardson, he has been too inconsistent for me to trust him to win a game. Rams and Jets. There is a well-known saying, history repeats itself. The reason why I am bringing that up is because there is something about this game that feels suspicious. I remember a few years ago when the Rams went on the road to take on the Jets. It looked like the Jets were tanking so they can draft Trevor Lawrence. They're in a position to do so if they were to tank. But then somehow the Jets won that game. and they lost out on Trevor Lawrence. They ended up with the second overall pick and settled for Zach Wilson. As much as I do want to call for the upset and pick the Jets to win, the last couple of times I have picked the Jets to win, they have really let me down. While the Rams, they last played on Thursday night, and for those of you who tune in on a regular basis, you know that I do tend to favor teams who played earlier in the week last week, as they have the extra rest factor to them. I'm going to go with the Rams, but I personally would not be afraid to maybe pick the Jets. I mean, who knows? They pull off the upset. You can say that you called it. I really want to do that, but I don't want to get let down by the Jets once again. So I'm going to pick the Rams in this case. But I sense this is a trap game for the Rams, and I think they overcome it. Eagles and Commanders. The Eagles have won 10 in a row, and with a win this week, they will clinch the NFC East. And we saw this matchup earlier in the season in Philadelphia, and it was a game that the Commanders were in. But instead of attempting a field goal in the fourth quarter to take the lead, they decide to go for it on fourth down, and the Eagles defense rises to the occasion and gets a fourth down stop. And it's what changed the entire momentum of that game. For the Eagles, it was smooth sailing from there. For some reason, the Commanders, they tend to play the Eagles really close more often than not. And it's pretty much their Super Bowl. This game will be the Commanders' Super Bowl. But it's just really difficult to pick against the Eagles, a team who's won 10 in a row, and it's been smooth sailing since their bye week. Starting the season 2-2, winning 10 in a row. I am going to pick the Eagles to win this game, and they will clinch the NFC East. Browns and Bengals. The Browns, a loss to the Chiefs last week in a game where the Browns had 6 turnovers. Jameis Winston was benched in the fourth quarter for Dorian Thompson-Robinson, while the Bengals, they've won 2 in a row. They have kept their playoff hopes intact. And just like these last 2 weeks, the Bengals, they have known that their season is on the line, and all they can do at this point is win and hope they can get some help from around the league. And I do think, once again, the Bengals, with their backs against the wall, they realize that they need to win to have any hope of making the playoffs. And for the Browns, Nick Chubb also sustained a foot injury in last week's game against the Chiefs, and he is done for the season. I am going to pick the Bengals to win, and for the time being, keep their playoff hopes intact. I think the Bengals, they make it 3 in a row. Joe Burrow has been playing well this season, leading the NFL in passing yards. Saying he's playing well would probably be an understatement, but considering how the Bengals had the slow start to the season, people aren't really talking about Joe Burrow's season, but they do get the win this week. Vikings and Seahawks. The Vikings, they continue to win, while the Seahawks, their up and down season continues. A loss to the Packers at home on Sunday Night Football. And just like I say just about every week, which Seahawks defense is going to show up in this game? Because if the good Seahawks defense shows up, the Seahawks, they have a very strong chance of pulling off this upset, as Geno Smith, he did exit the game last week with an injury, as Sam Howell, he did play the later stages of that game last week. And Kenneth Walker has been in and out of the lineup this entire season with injuries. Zach Charbonnet has done a good job in filling in for Kenneth Walker this season. But this Vikings team, they just look more and more like a complete team each and every single week. There are two losses of the season, the Lions and the Rams, in a game that did have some controversy involved in that game. And I am leaning towards the negative Seahawks defense that shows up. The Seahawks defense, it looks like a bottom tier defense in the league. And there was a comment last week telling me to not underestimate the Seahawks, but it wasn't underestimating them. I was just predicting that the wrong Seahawks defense was going to show up in that game, and that was ultimately what happened. And I think it's what happens again, especially if Geno Smith does not start in this game. If it is Sam Howell, I think Brian Flores is going to have the scheme to give Sam Howell fits. I'm going to pick the Vikings to continue rolling. Jaguars and Raiders. And I am not going to spend too much time on this game, as this is a game where I simply have to pick someone to win, because that is the deal with predicting NFL games. And if I get this game wrong, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it, as both teams are a combined 5-23 on the season. And I'm just going to pick the team that I feel like has given more valiant efforts throughout the season, and that is the Jaguars. So I'm going to go with the Jaguars for that simple reason. Plus, the Raiders, they just seem to be tanking at this point in time. And the Raiders fans, they do indeed want them to tank, as I have seen on social media, and fans at the game last week against the Falcons. I'm going to pick the Jaguars. 49ers and Dolphins. Both teams 6-8, still for the time being have playoff hopes. Both teams, injuries have done a number on them this season. For the 49ers mostly, as part of their disappointing season for both teams has been injuries, but not as much for the Dolphins as the 49ers. Tua did miss 4 games due to a concussion, and the Dolphins offense just looked completely anemic without him. Now the 49ers, Christian McCaffrey's been out most of the season. Brandon Ayuk, a season-ending injury earlier in the season. Trent Williams has been injured throughout the season. Nick Bosa, he's missed some time. And I am going to pick the 49ers in this game simply because they did play on Thursday night last week, and it was a very frustrating performance for both teams offensively, as there were no touchdowns scored in that game. And I think the 49ers, I think they do show a response this week, and I do think they get the win. The Dolphins' defense has been underrated throughout the last couple of seasons, but I think this game will surprisingly be a high-scoring game, and I am going to pick the 49ers to respond after last week's loss. Buccaneers and Cowboys, Sunday Night Football. The Buccaneers continue to hold strong in the NFC South, taking full advantage of the Falcons' losing streak, while the Cowboys, they are not officially eliminated from the playoffs yet, but they are doing everything they can to finish the season on a positive note. They've won 3 of their last 4 games, and the loss they had against the Bengals on Monday night a couple weeks ago, it was a game they could have won, but a mistake on special teams is what cost the Cowboys in that game. And the Cowboys, they are still trying to salvage what they can from a disappointing season. Rico Dowdle has been doing well in these last few games, but the Buccaneers, they have been getting better as the weeks have gone on. as they look like a much better football team than they did in the beginning of the season, and I do think that continues. I think the Buccaneers, they end what little hope the Cowboys have of ending the year on a strong note, as the Cowboys, they have the Buccaneers this week, the Eagles next week, and the Commanders to end the season. I'm going to go with the Buccaneers. Week 16 concludes with Monday Night Football, Saints and Packers. The Saints, a very controversial game last week. The ending was very controversial, as the Saints, they score a touchdown with no time left, but there were 9 seconds left, and the clock did not continue to run. The clock stopped for an entire 4 seconds, and the game should have been over, and it was addressed that it was a mistake, and that should not have happened. The Saints, they score a touchdown. Instead of going for the extra point to send it to overtime, they go for 2 and the win. They don't get the 2-point conversion. And now they go on the road to take on the Packers, where the Saints, they are nearly 2 touchdown underdogs in this game, as we saw both Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler in the game last week. Alvin Kamara's status is unknown for this matchup, and I genuinely don't think it matters. I just don't see a pathway for the Saints to win this game. I think the Packers, they win this game convincingly. And that will do it for my Week 16 NFL predictions. Comment your predictions down below. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. My Week 15 NFL takeaways will be on YouTube Shorts later this week. Enjoy the games this week. Until next time, Vegas is always watching.